Essentially what we do in here is light source development and measurement. The overall aim is to reduce maintenance, reduce power, so we can solarise stations, reduce diesel fuel usage, and generally provide very robust, reliable signals to the mariner. So a good place to start, I guess, would be this beast here. This is a British standard lighthouse lamp number 17. It's 3,000 watts, driven at 100 volts. These probably came into service during the 50s and 60s, and they were used when we electrified the stations to replace paraffin vapour burners. Now you'll notice the filament shape of this particular lamp is used to replicate those old paraffin vapour burners. So when you put them in large lighthouse lenses such as that one, the lens is focused to an area rather than to a point. They don't make these anymore. This is probably one of the last ones kicking around, and our job is to replace these with something that's a lot more efficient, a lot less power and a lot brighter. So a fairly easy task really. So this is a cluster of 3 250 watt floodlights. You'll note that it's the same sort of filament size. So we can put these into lighthouse optics with confidence that they're going to work the same. The added benefit of these is if one of them does fail, the other two stay alight, and therefore we've still got a light that's of use to the mariner. We started to introduce this type of light source during the 70s and 80s. This is a metal halide light source. It's 1,000 watts and it's a lot more efficient than our old tungsten filament friends here. Essentially they're a hot bit of metal that you heat up and they give off light. 60% of the energy put in is wasted in heat. These ones are a lot more efficient. Unfortunately you can't switch them on and off very quickly. These generally take a couple of minutes to come up to full brightness, but again immensely efficient. So we moved down to something like a 400 watt lamp. Again, you can still get hold of these, but they're quite expensive and the associated equipment takes quite a lot of power to drive them. But nowadays we're down to this kind of size really. We've etched this tube here to replicate some of these filament sizes, and these generally will last about a year. The main thrust of our work and development now is within LEDs. This is a little 5mm LED and it has a single PN diode junction inside, and as the current is passed through it illuminesces out the light, and that's how you get your light output from there. But it wasn't until 4 or 5 years ago that they started producing what we call high power LEDs. Now on this chip there's 36 of these single 5mm PN junctions on each chip. We started playing with these and we quickly found out that although LEDs are fairly cool to touch, if they overheat in the junction you get a thing called thermal runaway, and basically just get brighter and brighter and brighter until they explode. So we had to look at different ways of getting the heat away from the junction, and we started off with small heat sinks and things like that, and we quickly realised that if we wanted to drive these very hard with a lot of current, that we needed to get a lot of heat away. So we eventually ended up with this, very easy to fit, very robust, and we replaced the 400 watt metal halide with this 78 watts of power for the same range. And what that meant was that we could remove the diesel generator to power this lamp and replace it with solar power and small wind turbines, which provided enough charge for the batteries to power this light. LEDs are fantastic and they last for a long time, about 5 years. This is only driving at 700 milliamps. We can drive this up to 4.2 amps, which whether the camera will be able to pick this up, it might blind the camera, but we can drive it up to 4.2 amps. So that is considerably brighter, but that's the kind of thing that we need to do to get the ranges. It's all very well us developing all these new light sources and everything else, but we need to be able to quantify it. We use a calibrated reference light from the National Physical Laboratory, which is calibrated at 443.8 candle power. And we simply substitute our reference light for the light that we're measuring in the indoor light range, and that quantifies the light intensity within there. And we can also measure the divergence of buoy lights, and we can also measure the colour of the light. We're limited by the physical size of the lantern that we can put on the range in here on the table, and the size of the mirror. We only have a 20-inch mirror in here, so anything bigger than that needs to go over to our outdoor light range, which is quite unique. It's a series of shipping containers, all painted black inside, joined together, and we have a very similar setup. And in there we can measure the big lighthouse optics and big beacons that we get in. We put something like this in a big old first order rotating optic, we can get upwards of 22, 23 miles out of it, which is fantastic for 70 watts. So it's a particularly challenging work when they say, can you go from 3 kilowatts down to 70 watts, and we want the same range and we want it to last for 10 years, but voila, we've done it.